Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Watson, and as Pete said, I'm here to present the IMS Business Report 2016. Now, for you guys that have seen this before, the report's designed to give you some interesting facts and figures about the electronic music industry and to provide some context for your discussions and the panels that are going to happen over the next 3 days. Hopefully you can follow the slides behind me and see what we're going through each slide. The report will also be available to download straight afterwards as well. So the report covers all the main aspects of the industry, as usual, but this year we've also got the results of the unique IMS survey as well. So let's kick off with the music to start with. And for context, this slide tries to show, in terms of the global music industry across all genres, where is the growth coming from? On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the countries that experienced the highest growth year on year in music revenue. And you can see that they're dominated by countries in South America and also China, which grew at 64% last year. On the right-hand side, you can see those people that subscribe to paid streaming services. And this started out at just 20 million users all the way back in 2012. There's now 68 million users worldwide, and that represents a 66% increase in just the last year alone. So let's move specifically into the electronic music space. And this slide is all about the USA. On the left-hand side, you can see the volume of streams for electronic music tracks in 2014 and 2015. Year on year, that's gone up 33%, and that means there's now 15 billion streams of electronic music tracks in the US alone. As you can see on the right-hand side, the chart there shows the share of electronic music sales across digital tracks and across albums. Both of those are slightly down year on year, so albums dropping a little bit to less than 2%, digital tracks more up at kind of 7%. But streaming is where the growth is, as we've seen, and that can be shown if we see this next slide. Staying in the US, and on the left-hand side, you can see the percentage of streams by genre. So dance is actually the 5th most popular genre in terms of streaming in the US. And on the right-hand side, you can see that by each genre, how much of the sales or downloads are from streaming. And you can actually see, so the orange bar represents electronic music, and you can see it's only second there to Latin music. Over 50% of all electronic music sales in the US were from streaming. So clearly, electronic music is incredibly well positioned for the growth in streaming, and that's most likely due to the demographic. If we now move on to the next slide and look at the UK, the streaming theme continues. And actually in the UK, streaming of dance music tracks growth was higher than any other genre. So here's all the genres ranked from top to bottom in terms of their year-on-year growth. And you can see dance sits right at the top there. 107% growth in streams year on year. That beat rock, pop, any other mainstream genre. In terms of UK share of dance music across other formats, once again, similar theme to the US, slight drops across compilations and singles, and albums roughly flat. But interestingly, if you start to look at the demographic side of things, actually, amongst 13 to 19-year-olds, 20% of their spend on music was on electronic music. And the streaming theme can be seen if you just take Spotify's end of 2015 review. The most streamed track in 2015 on Spotify, which has now become the most streamed track of all time, was Major Laser's Lean On. That now has over 540 million streams of just one track. The breakout artist of 2015, no surprises, quite frankly, it's Kygo, and he became the first artist to reach 1 billion streams and did it in roughly a year, which is pretty impressive. Finally, the most viral track, whether you love it or whether you hate it, is Robin Schulz's Sugar, and that made 55 appearances on Spotify's top 50 chart throughout the year. So what's a good way, though, of trying to gauge overall interest across the world in electronic music? On the next slide, I've had a look at the Google Trends searches for various genres of music. So we look back to May 2009, which is where all the start on the index on the left-hand side, all the way through to today. And you can see that when you index searches for different genres, electronic music, which is the orange line, has clearly massively outgrown any other genre. The level of searches for electronic music is now over 3 times what it was 3 or 4 years ago, particularly after the strong growth in 2013 and 2014. As you can see, all the other genres sort of bumbling along at the bottom, no real growth there at all, been fairly consistent. And what about within electronic music? Well, Beatport have very kindly shared their top-selling genres within the electronic music space. And I know, particularly for those at the back, this may look like a load of squiggles on a slide, but hopefully you can see the big, thick orange line, which is third from the top and rises to the top. That's sales of techno tracks on Beatport. 2.5 years ago, techno was the 3rd best-selling genre on Beatport. Now it's the most popular selling genre. The other big riser is the thick black line you can see hopefully on the slide, which is actually drum and bass. Number 9, 2.5 years ago, has now risen all the way up to number 6. So finally, in the music section, we're just going to have a look at radio play, and specifically focusing in on France. And there's a panel later this week on France, which hopefully these stats will be useful for. So you can see here, the graph just shows the percentage of tracks played on each radio station in France that were actually dance tracks. And surprisingly, 6 of the main stations in France played more than 10% of their music was electronic music. And the highest one at the top there is at 74%. And interestingly, in 2014, which is the latest stats available for France, Avicii was the best-selling artist across all genres in that market. So let's move now from the music to the DJs and artists. And first up, the slightly controversial, but still quite interesting, Forbes Electronic Cash Kings. Supposedly a way of measuring how much the top DJs are earning year on year. And you can see here, we're showing 2012 all the way through to 2015. And if we look 2014 on 2015, at the top, Calvin Harris still remains number 1, earning $66 million, supposedly, in 2015. Actually, the same amount as in 2014. But that's still more, for context, than the highest earning basketball player, LeBron James, and the highest earning F1 driver, Lewis Hamilton. The second and third place DJs actually saw over 20% increases in their earnings, whilst the rest actually saw almost no growth. So as compared to last year, when we were talking about huge growth and huge inflation in DJ and artist fees and their revenues, actually this year it's a lot more modest, around 3% year on year. Whilst earnings growth may be flattening off, let's have a look at social media fan bases, where actually the growth continues. And TopDJs.com have shared with us basically their database of top DJs and their social media fan bases a year ago and today. And if we look at the growth in those last 12 months on Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, and YouTube, you can see there's huge growth. So at the top, David Guetta actually, well documented, his Facebook fan base is actually falling. It's down 6% year on year. But obviously, on other platforms like SoundCloud, he's actually managed to generate a much bigger fan base, up 60% year on year. Slightly further down the list, at number 9 there, you can see Martin Garrix, highlighted across all the platforms. He's managed over 50% growth on every single one of those platforms in the last year. And interestingly, at the bottom, so we took the average of the top 1,000 ranked DJs over the year, and their SoundCloud followers are actually up net 36% year on year. YouTube subscribers up 68%. So whatever you may think about earnings and popularity or whatever, these guys are growing their fan bases massively. One artist, as we saw earlier, that's done that more than others is Kygo. So splitting out just his social media following on this slide, you can see the sort of small hashed part of the bars at the bottom is his total fan base a year ago, and then the big sections at the top of the graph are how many fans he's added over the last year. In total, he's managed to add 2.6 million fans across all those platforms. For context, that's about 7,000 a day. And you can see there that particularly across Facebook, 1.4 million, his YouTube fan base is now 15 times what it was just 12 months ago. So now let's move on to talk about the clubs and festivals. And first up, just had a look at the DJ Mag Top 100 Clubs poll, but decided to look at the new entries. So where are the clubs coming from? They're entering that poll for the first time, and who's voting for them? You can see there, so they're ranked by the country in which the club is. So on the left-hand side, China leads the way. 4 new clubs entered the top 100 poll last year from China. We've then got 3 from Indonesia, all in Jakarta. And that means in Asia, there were 9 out of just the 20 new entries were from that continent. Interestingly, the highest new entry of all of them was actually Omnia in Las Vegas, which obviously only opened just before the last poll took place. And how many people are actually attending electronic music events? Well, the slide here shows at the top the percentage of people that said, I've attended an electronic music event over the last 3 years, or in the case of the Netherlands, the last year. In the UK, 16%, twice that in Spain, and in the last year alone in the Netherlands, 14%. And you're going to hear a lot more about that in the next presentation from Sophie at Ticketmaster. So lots of people are attending events, but how does that rank against other types of events? So on the next slide, you can see basically the growth year on year of the percentage of people in the US that say they are going to various events. And what we've done is just rank these events by those that are more related to electronic music, which are the 3 at the top, and those that are less related to electronic music at the bottom. And you can clearly see the ones at the top are up 3%, 1%, and 2%. So growth really, and people saying, yep, more people are going to electronic music events in the US than they were a year ago. Whereas for other events, actually, it's pretty much flat. Other music festivals, etc., people are saying, actually, I'm going to as many as I did before. Let's now pick a couple of those biggest festivals in the electronic music space. First one up is Tomorrowland. And actually, what we've done here is just look at ticket pricing and how quickly they're selling out. So on the left-hand side, their weekend ticket price over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's gone up every year by about 12%. But still, this year, supposedly they sold out in just 40 minutes. So 12% price increases, selling out in 40 minutes, 180,000 fans. Something must be going right. And clearly, they've built a huge social media fan base and following to generate that interest. They've got 18 million fans across all their platforms, and on YouTube, they've generated over 700 million views. Most of those, as you're probably aware of, are the after movies they produce of the festival each year. On to the second one that we're looking at, which is EDC Vegas. And actually, these guys at Insomniac commissioned a report a short while ago to say, well, OK, great. Lots of people are coming to our event. They're spending lots of money. But what's the impact on the local economy? Well, actually, they worked out the last 5 years of their events, people have spent about $800 million US. But actually, that's translated into a local kind of economic impact of jobs and further spending of about 1.3 billion. What does that really mean? Well, that means for every dollar spent by either the company themselves or people going to the event, it generates about $1.60 in the local community. And obviously, that's incredibly powerful when people are trying to talk to local authorities or trying to justify the economic impact of an event like that. And if you're in any doubt that electronic music isn't spreading across the world, here's a few examples of electronic music festivals that have happened this year in some places that you may not think about. So Panama, Cuba, Vietnam, and the Philippines, all are having reasonably sized events with some pretty big headliners and drawing crowds in. And this has got to be great for the industry as growth kind of goes across the world. Next, we're just going to go on to talking about companies and brands. And first up, here's Live Nation. So clearly, Live Nation have been focused on the electronic music space for some time, and that, to be quite honest, continues in the most recent year. Here's 4 acquisitions they've made or shares purchased in the last year, all of which relate to electronic music. So you may have seen recently, they bought shares in the Warehouse Project and Parklife Festival in Manchester in the UK. They bought Union Events, which runs Chasing Summer in Canada. They've also bought the Mama Group, who run Lovebox in London as well. So clearly, and there's a quote at the bottom of that slide from their annual report saying actually they're doing incredibly well with brands like EDC and Creamfields. What about those that are selling electronic music tracks? So on the left-hand side, we've got a very well-known online electronic music seller. And looking at their revenue for downloads over the last year, they've grown their revenue by 11%. And interestingly, Central America was the region that drove most of that growth. It was up 31%. On the right-hand side, another well-known brand, Ministry of Sound in the UK. So their compilation revenue was also up around 11% year on year. And streams are actually up 4.5 times what they were in 2014. So both of those companies showing actually some quite a solid growth in the most recent year. What about the product side of things? So These are stats from the US, and you may have seen we presented a similar view last year. This time, tried to break it out by what actual products within that market are doing the best. So this shows the year-on-year change in the volume of products sold across each of those types. And you can clearly see that digital DJ controllers on the left-hand side are up 15% year-on-year, and no surprise, turntables are also up 10%. Everyone's talking about, obviously, the vinyl kind of revolution and kind of bringing that back, and that's clearly shown in the product sales there. So for the penultimate section, we go on to the IMS survey. Now, some people in this room hopefully may have filled in the survey. We went out to a whole bunch of industry stakeholders and experts and said, well, actually, what do you think are the most important drivers for the future and success of the industry we're in? So we asked them to rank each of these different drivers. So you can see there's a whole load there. I don't expect you to read every word on this page, but on the left-hand side, you've got kind of a quick summary of the different things that we thought we'd ask people about. So whether SFX and Beatport sales, streaming revenue, or anything else. And we asked people to say, well, are these things very important, fairly important, not that important, or not that important at all to the future growth of the industry? So we then decided to rank them by people's results and see what came out. Hopefully you can see that basically the orange bar represents the percentage of people that thought this was very important to the future of the industry. And it may surprise some, it probably doesn't surprise most of you, that at the top was streaming. Clearly most important. And I think you're going to hear a lot more about that in various sessions over this week. There's then a whole bunch of others which are also actually reasonably important, so you can see there are 4 there in the middle, including the approach to drug harm. And clearly, look, the reality is all of these things are important. We're just trying to give a relative ranking of actually which ones might matter more to people than others. Interestingly, so the proportion of women and obviously diversity in the industry actually ranked quite low if you looked at all respondents. But we decided to look at actually how does that compare if you just split out those female respondents to our survey. So on the next slide, on the left, it matches the order you saw on the last slide, so streaming at the top, and proportion of women in the industry at number 6. Actually, if you just split the survey results for those women who answered it, you can see that it actually becomes number 2. And clearly that shows that this is an issue and this is important to the future of our industry. And clearly there is a diversity panel later in this week where I think a lot of these issues are going to be talked about. Once again, though, across all respondents, streaming still clearly number 1. So a lot of stats, a lot of review. You can clearly see that growth is slowing, but there's some definite areas of new opportunity and where the industry is going. So what does all this mean? Well, the final slide is basically our estimate of how much the industry is worth to us every single year. So we believe the industry is now worth $7.1 billion. And for context, if we just sit here and we think about, the IMS 3 years ago, we were saying it was just worth $4.5 billion. That means our industry has grown by nearly 60% in just 3 years. There are very few industries in the world that grow at that kind of level. And why does the outlook still look positive? Well, there's 3 key reasons, I think. The streaming growth. We know that's where the growth of the music industry is coming from, and clearly electronic music is incredibly well positioned in order to make the most of that growth. Secondly, new regions and markets. There's loads of new clubs and festivals opening up in some very high-growth developing areas, whether that's Asia or South America. Clearly, that's a good thing for the industry, and it'll be a great thing for future growth. And finally, the US market is definitely maturing. Obviously, we saw a massive, explosive growth 2 to 3 years ago. That now appears to be consolidating and actually turning into a more sustainable, more wide-scale approach to what people want to do and people want to get involved with electronic music. So thank you for listening to the IMS Business Report today. If you want to find out any more, as I said, the report's available to download. I know there's lots of stats in there, so go download it. It'll be on the Twitter account and available from the IMS website. Come and talk to me. I'm here all week. Or you can follow us on Twitter and find out more. So have a great IMS, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin.